Silent shadows. Eleanor Walsh moved through the grand ballroom of Ravenwood Hotel like a ghost, clipboard pressed to her chest, eyes scanning for imperfections. At 29, she had mastered the art of invisibility, a necessary skill when working under the infamous Victor Kensington, CEO of Ravenwood Luxury Hotels. The centerpieces are 2 inches off-center, she whispered to a server, gently adjusting a crystal vase filled with white orchids. Mr. Kensington notices everything. The server nodded gratefully. Everyone knew Victor's reputation for perfection, and his ice-cold reaction to anything less. Note: Eleanor tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, checking her watch. The annual Diamond Gala was starting in 30 minutes, and despite being just an assistant event coordinator, she carried the weight of its success on her slender shoulders. Her boss, Marianne Phillips, was out with pneumonia, leaving Eleanor to manage the most prestigious charity event on the Ravenwood calendar. Walsh. The sharp voice cut through the pre-event bustle like a blade. Eleanor turned, meeting the steel-gray eyes of Victor Kensington. At 38, he commanded every room with his tailored suits and razor-sharp jawline. He'd built Ravenwood from a single property into an international empire through sheer force of will, and, rumor had it, a heart of stone. "Yes, Mr. Kensington," she replied, voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "The guest list changes I requested this morning, were they implemented?" He didn't look at her as he spoke, adjusting his platinum cufflinks. "Yes, sir. The Harrington party was moved to table 3, and the Japanese investors are seated near the stage as requested." He gave a curt nod, still not looking at her. Eleanor was used to this, being heard but not seen. In 3 years of employment, Victor had never once called her by her first name. "The governor's wife is allergic to roses," he said, eyes scanning the room. "I assume you've ensured none are present." "Every arrangement is orchid and lily only, sir. I verified it personally." For a fleeting moment, his eyes met hers. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, crossed his face before the mask returned. "Carry on," he said, turning away to greet an arriving board member. Eleanor exhaled slowly. Working for Victor was like walking on glass in ballet slippers. Delicate, dangerous, and requiring perfect balance. In the staff area, she found Zoe, her closest friend and the hotel's pastry chef, arranging dessert platters. "How's the dragon today?" Zoe asked, piping gold detailing onto tiny chocolate eclairs. "Breathing fire as usual," Eleanor replied, stealing a raspberry from a platter. "Sometimes I wonder if he ever smiles." "Not since his father died, according to kitchen gossip," Zoe whispered. "Thomas says the old man was the only one who could make Victor laugh." Eleanor had heard the rumors about Victor's rigid upbringing under his father's demanding standards, about the tragic boating accident 3 years ago that had claimed both his parents, about how he'd become even colder afterward. "It doesn't excuse treating people like furniture," Eleanor said softly, though part of her wondered what it would be like to see Victor Kensington smile. Really smile. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister, Rachel. "Good luck tonight. Don't let the Ice King push you around. Love you." Eleanor smiled. Rachel was her rock, the reason she endured Victor's demanding nature without complaint. Her sister's medical school tuition didn't pay itself, and the generous Ravenwood salary made it possible. As guests began arriving, business moguls, celebrities, politicians, Eleanor slipped back into her role, an invisible thread weaving through the fabric of the evening, ensuring everything ran smoothly. She directed servers, solved a seating crisis, and gently guided an intoxicated socialite away from the press. From across the room, she occasionally felt Victor's gaze following her. Each time she looked up, however, he was engaged in conversation, charm turned on for donors and dignitaries, a mask he wore as skillfully as his bespoke suits. What Eleanor didn't know was that Victor had indeed been watching her, For weeks now, he'd observed her quiet competence, her ability to anticipate problems before they arose. He'd noticed how staff responded to her gentle guidance versus the fearful compliance they showed him. As the evening progressed and champagne flowed, neither Eleanor nor Victor could have predicted how their carefully maintained worlds were about to collide, or how a single moment would shatter the silence between them forever. The tempest unveiled. The Diamond Gala was in full swing, a symphony of elegance and wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over the ballroom as string quartet music wove through conversations of the elite. Eleanor moved with practiced precision, her burgundy staff uniform allowing her to blend into the background as she orchestrated the evening's intricate dance. "The auction items need final verification," murmured Thomas, the head of security, passing Eleanor with barely a glance. She nodded, making her way to the display room adjacent to the ballroom. The auction was the centerpiece of tonight's fundraiser. Rare art pieces, luxury vacations, and priceless jewelry donated to benefit children's education in developing countries. Eleanor paused before a striking oil painting, a stormy seascape with a single lighthouse standing defiant against raging waters. The placard indicated it was an original Devereux, worth over $300,000. Something about it resonated with her. The solitary beacon holding strong against overwhelming forces. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Eleanor turned to find Sophia Reeves, the elegant museum curator, who had helped secure many of the auction items. In her 60s, with silver hair and knowing eyes, Sophia had taken Eleanor under her wing during event preparations. "It's captivating," Eleanor admitted, "like it's telling a story of resilience." Sophia smiled. Victor selected it personally. Surprising, given his usual taste for more conventional pieces. End quote. Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. "Mr. Kensington chose this." End quote. "Indeed, I believe he said it reminded him of something important." Sophia checked her watch. "The auction begins in 20 minutes. Is everything prepared?" "Yes, just doing final checks. The governor's wife is quite interested in the emerald necklace, by the way." As Sophia departed, Eleanor found herself looking at the painting with new eyes. What did it remind Victor of? What hidden depths existed beneath his icy exterior? Pacing. Her contemplation was interrupted by the shrill voice of Diane Lancaster, a board member's wife notorious for her demanding nature. "You there, server girl." Diane beckoned imperiously, clearly intoxicated, champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. "I need to see that diamond bracelet before the auction. Immediately." Eleanor approached with a polite smile. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Lancaster, but the items can't be removed from their displays before the auction begins. Hotel policy." Diane's eyes narrowed. "Do you know who my husband is? Get me that bracelet now." "Perhaps I can show you the detailed appraisal information," Eleanor offered, maintaining her composure. "Useless," Diane spat, pushing past Eleanor toward the display case. In her haste, she stumbled, sending her champagne flying directly onto the Devereux painting. The room froze. Golden liquid dripped down the canvas, seeping into the carefully rendered stormy seas. "Oh," Diane gasped theatrically. "How clumsy of the staff to place it so precariously." Eleanor was already moving, signaling discreetly for assistance while grabbing the emergency preservation kit kept behind the display podium. As an art history minor in college, she knew the first moments after such damage were critical. "Step back, please, Mrs. Lancaster," she said firmly, her voice finding an authority she rarely used. "What is happening here?" The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees as Victor Kensington materialized beside them, his expression thunderous as he surveyed the damaged painting. "This girl was incredibly careless with the displays," Diane began, swaying slightly. She practically knocked my drink. Mr. Kensington, Eleanor interrupted, focused on blotting the canvas with specialized absorbent paper. I've already contacted the art preservation specialist we have on standby. If we act quickly, the damage can be minimized. Victor's gaze swiveled between the painting, Diane's obvious intoxication, and Eleanor's methodical emergency response. For a moment, Eleanor thought she saw clarity in his eyes, an understanding of what had actually occurred. Then Diane stepped closer to him, placing a manicured hand on his arm. Victor, darling, you really must train your staff better. First, refusing to show me the auction items, then this catastrophe. Eleanor continued her work, knowing arguing would only escalate the situation and waste precious minutes for the painting's preservation. Miss Walsh, Victor's voice was arctic, in the hallway, now. She carefully handed the preservation materials to the art specialist who had just arrived before following Victor out of the room, aware of every eye watching her exit. In the deserted hallway, Victor turned on her, his tall frame blocking the light. Explain. Mrs. Lancaster was intoxicated and demanded to handle the jewelry. When I refused per protocol, she attempted to access the display herself and spilled her drink on the painting. Eleanor stated factually, meeting his gaze. And you thought contradicting a board member's wife was appropriate? Eleanor blinked, disbelief washing over her. Sir, she was attempting to violate security protocols for items worth millions. Your job is to make the guests happy, not to create scenes. His voice was controlled but lethal. Do you have any idea how much that painting cost? Yes, sir. Approximately $320,000, which is why I immediately implemented the preservation protocol rather than wasting time arguing about who was at fault. Something dangerous flashed in Victor's eyes. Your insubordination is noted, Ms. Walsh. Perhaps you forget your place in this organization. The unfairness of it stung, but Eleanor maintained her composure. With respect, sir, I was doing my job. Your job, he said, stepping closer, is to be invisible, to solve problems before they occur, to make certain nothing disrupts events of this magnitude. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than a shout. People like you are paid to work, not to challenge guests or offer opinions. Stay silent and do your job. Every word was a blade, precisely aimed to cut her down to size. The hallway seemed to spin slightly as Eleanor absorbed the public humiliation. Through the open door, she could see staff and several guests watching the exchange. Yes, Mr. Kensington, she said finally, her voice soft but not broken. Will that be all? For a split second, something shifted in his expression, perhaps surprise at her composure, or a flicker of doubt about his reaction. Before he could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the building. Thomas burst through the door. Fire in the East Wing, it spreading quickly. Chaos erupted as guests began pouring into the hallway. Victor immediately took command, directing security to manage evacuations. Eleanor slipped back into the ballroom, helping guide panicked attendees toward the nearest exits. Through the growing smoke, she heard something that made her blood freeze, a child's cry coming from the small antechamber used as a coat check. While most guests had been in the main ballroom, she remembered seeing Victor's young cousin, 8-year-old Benedict, who had been allowed to attend the first hour of the gala before being settled in the quiet reading nook near the coat check with his nanny. Without hesitation, Eleanor changed direction, pushing against the tide of escaping guests. The smoke was thickening, alarm lights casting everything in surreal red pulses. She pulled a linen napkin from a table, doused it with water from a flower arrangement, and pressed it over her mouth. Benedict, she called, coughing as she entered the antechamber. Benedict, are you here? A small, frightened voice answered from behind a fallen shelf. "Help! I'm scared." Eleanor found the boy curled into a ball, his nanny unconscious beside him. The ceiling above them was beginning to glow ominously with the heat from the adjacent room. "It's going to be okay," she promised, checking the nanny's pulse. Steady, but she wouldn't be waking soon. "We need to leave now." As she lifted Benedict into her arms, a burning beam crashed down behind them, blocking their exit path. The boy clung to her neck, trembling. Eleanor looked around desperately, remembering the service corridor that connected to the kitchen. "Hold tight," she whispered to Benedict, "and keep this over your face." She pressed the damp cloth to his nose and mouth. As they navigated through thickening smoke, Eleanor felt a searing pain across her upper arm where falling embers had landed. She gritted her teeth, focusing only on getting the child to safety. Outside, in the chaos of flashing emergency lights and evacuated guests, Victor Kensington was in a state of controlled panic. "Where is Benedict?" he demanded of the security team. "Has anyone seen my cousin?" That's when the service door burst open, and when Eleanor emerged, coughing violently, her uniform singed and arm blistering with burns. In her arms, Benedict clung tightly, face buried against her shoulder. Victor froze, watching as Eleanor handed the boy to paramedics. When she turned and their eyes met across the courtyard, something profound and unspoken passed between them. A recognition that transcended their roles and the harsh words exchanged minutes earlier. Eleanor swayed slightly, shock setting in. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was Victor Kensington running toward her. His face transformed by an emotion she'd never seen there before. Fear. H2. Embers of change. The hospital room was quiet, save for the steady beep of monitors and the occasional squeak of rubber-soled shoes in the hallway. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, fragments of the previous night flickering through her mind like a broken film reel. Flames, smoke, the weight of a child in her arms, and strangely, the image of Victor Kensington's face, not cold and distant as usual, but twisted with concern. When she finally opened her eyes fully, the sterile white ceiling above her came into focus. Eleanor tried to move, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through her bandaged arm. "P. The doctor says you shouldn't move too much," came a soft voice from the corner of the room. "P." Eleanor turned her head, certain she was still dreaming. Victor Kensington sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His tie was gone, shirt wrinkled, and dark stubble shadowed his jaw. Most shocking of all were his eyes, red-rimmed and haunted. "Mr. Kensington?" Her voice came out as a raspy whisper. "What are you doing here?" He stood, approaching her bedside with uncharacteristic hesitation. "You've been unconscious for nearly 18 hours. This didn't answer her question, but Eleanor was distracted by the implications. 18 hours? But I have the Hamilton wedding preparations." "The wedding has been reassigned," he interrupted. "Your only job right now is to recover." A nurse entered, checking Eleanor's vitals and changing the dressing on her arm. Eleanor noticed how Victor stepped back, watching the procedure with an intensity that seemed almost protective. "Second-degree burns," the nurse explained cheerfully. "You're lucky it wasn't worse. Another few minutes in that smoke." She shook her head, updating the chart. "Your sister's been here most of the night." She just went down to the cafeteria. After the nurse left, an awkward silence settled between them. Eleanor studied Victor, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the way he seemed unable to meet her gaze directly. "Benedict?" she finally asked. "He's fine, not even a scratch." Victor's voice caught slightly. "Thanks to you." The door burst open as Rachel rushed in, coffee sloshing from a paper cup. "Ellie, you're awake." She stopped short at the sight of Victor. "Oh, Mr. Kensington, I didn't realize you were still here. The implied still made Eleanor wonder exactly how long Victor had been keeping vigil. I was just leaving, he said stiffly, gathering his jacket. At the door, he paused, turning back. Ms. Walsh, thank you, for Benedict, for everything. Without waiting for a response, he disappeared into the corridor. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Settling into the chair Victor had vacated. So that's the infamous Ice King. He's been here all night, you know. Refused to leave even when visiting hours ended. I think the nurses were too intimidated to enforce the rules. That can't be right, Eleanor murmured, confused by the image of Victor Kensington standing guard over her hospital bed. Oh, it's right. He also arranged for a private room and specialist consults. Rachel took a sip of her coffee. Want to explain why the CEO of Ravenwood Hotels is personally overseeing your medical care after you just saved his little cousin? Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering the harsh words Victor had spoken before the fire. It's complicated. In the days that followed, Eleanor's hospital room became a revolving door of visitors. Zoe brought pastries and gossip about the fire. Electrical fault in the East Wing. No serious injuries, except Eleanor's. Marianne sent flowers, with a card promising Eleanor's job would be waiting when she recovered. Even Sophia Reeves visited, bringing art books to pass the time. Conspicuously absent was Victor Kensington. Eleanor told herself this was normal. He had a multi-million-dollar hotel to run and a damaged wing to repair. The night of the fire must have been an anomaly, a momentary crack in his armor prompted by gratitude for saving Benedict. On her fourth day in the hospital, Eleanor was preparing for discharge when a knock came at her door. A tall woman with Victor's gray eyes and a warm smile entered, holding the hand of a small boy. Miss Walsh, the woman said, I'm Charlotte Kensington, Victor's sister, and this is Benedict. Benedict broke free, rushing to Eleanor's bedside with the directness only children can manage. You saved me from the fire. Uncle Victor says you're a hero. Eleanor smiled, touched by the boy's enthusiasm. I just did what anyone would do. No, Charlotte said seriously, sitting beside her brother. You didn't. You risked your life when others were running away. She took Eleanor's uninjured hand. Our family owes you everything. Benedict presented Eleanor with a handmade card, featuring a stick figure drawing of her carrying him through flames. Are you coming back to work at the hotel? Uncle Victor has been really sad without you there. Charlotte shot her son a look of fond exasperation. Benedict has a vivid imagination. But the boy continued earnestly. It's true. He keeps staring at his phone and sighing, and he yelled at Mr. Phillips for saying mean things about you at the meeting. Eleanor blinked in surprise as Charlotte gently changed the subject, asking about Eleanor's recovery. As they chatted, Eleanor found herself warming to Victor's sister, who seemed to possess all the charm and warmth Victor lacked. Before leaving, Charlotte pressed a business card into Eleanor's hand. My private number. Please call if you need anything. Anything at all. She lowered her voice. Victor wanted to come himself, but he's struggling with this, more than he lets on. That evening, as Rachel drove her home to their modest apartment, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the enigma of Victor Kensington. The man who had publicly humiliated her had also kept vigil at her hospital bed. The cold CEO had defended her in meetings. None of it made sense. Their apartment felt smaller after the spacious hospital room, but infinitely more comforting with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in Rachel's photography. Eleanor settled onto the couch, arm throbbing dully, despite the pain medication. You haven't told me everything, Rachel said, bringing her tea. What happened before the fire? Eleanor sighed, finally recounting the incident with Diane Lancaster and Victor's harsh reprimand. Rachel's expression darkened with each word. And you still went back for his cousin? After he treated you like that? Rachel shook her head in disbelief. You're either a saint or completely insane. It wasn't about him, Eleanor said softly. It was about a scared child. Later that night, unable to sleep, Eleanor found herself drawn to the small balcony overlooking the city lights. In the distance, she could make out the distinctive silhouette of Ravenwood Hotel against the skyline. For 3 years, that building had been the center of her professional life, a place where she had remained deliberately invisible, content to work behind the scenes. Her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. The Devereaux painting has been fully restored. I thought you would want to know. VK. Eleanor stared at the message, unsure how to respond, or even if she should. That Victor had taken the time to personally inform her about the painting's fate felt significant, though she couldn't articulate why. Across the city, in his penthouse office at Ravenwood Hotel, Victor Kensington stood at the window, gazing at the same night sky. On his desk lay an open personnel file, Eleanor Walsh's employment history, accomplishments, and potential. Beside it sat a half-finished letter he had been drafting and redrafting for days. The painting that had started everything hung on the wall behind him, the expert restoration having removed all traces of damage. Victor turned to look at it, seeing beyond the stormy seas to the message he had originally found so compelling, that even in the darkest tempest, a single light could change everything. He picked up his phone, staring at the sent message and wondering if she would reply. The great Victor Kensington, who could command rooms with a glance and close million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, found himself anxious about a text to an event coordinator. What he couldn't admit, not yet, was that something fundamental had shifted inside him the moment he saw Eleanor emerge from those flames, selflessly protecting someone she had no obligation to save. In that instant, all his carefully constructed walls had begun to crumble, leaving him vulnerable in ways he hadn't experienced since childhood. As dawn broke over the city, two people on opposite sides of the social spectrum lay awake, contemplating how a single night of disaster had connected them in ways neither fully understood, and how the embers of that fire were kindling something entirely unexpected between them. Bridges over troubled waters. 2 weeks after the fire, Eleanor returned to Ravenwood Hotel. The familiar marble lobby felt different somehow. Or perhaps she was the one who had changed. Staff members stopped to welcome her back, many expressing gratitude for her heroism. Even Thomas, the typically stoic head of security, offered a rare smile. Miss Walsh, Marianne greeted her warmly. Welcome back. We've kept your position open, though I'm afraid your workload has been temporarily reduced per HR instructions. Eleanor nodded, touching her healing arm self-consciously. I'm just happy to be back. How are the repairs coming along? The East Wing will reopen next month. Mr. Kensington has been personally overseeing the renovations. Marianne hesitated. He's asked to see you this morning. His office, 9 o'clock. Eleanor's stomach tightened. Despite their text exchange about the painting, she hadn't heard from Victor since the hospital. What awaited her in his office? A formal reprimand for challenging Diane Lancaster, a demotion disguised as concern for her health. At precisely 9, Eleanor knocked on the imposing double doors of Victor's executive suite. His assistant, a no-nonsense woman named Janet, nodded her through without the usual interrogation. Victor stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, backlit by morning sunlight. He turned as she entered, and for a moment neither spoke. Eleanor was struck by subtle changes in his appearance. The usual severity of his expression seemed softened somehow. Ms. Walsh, he finally said, gesturing to a chair. Please, sit. As she took a seat, Eleanor noticed the Devereaux painting hanging prominently behind his desk. The restoration is remarkable, she offered. You can't tell it was ever damaged. Some things can be restored more easily than others. Victor replied cryptically, taking his own seat. I've been reflecting on the night of the fire and on our interaction beforehand. Eleanor braced herself, maintaining her professional composure. I understand if you feel disciplinary action is necessary regarding Mrs. Lancaster. Stop. Victor raised a hand, surprising her. I'm not interested in discussing Diane Lancaster. I've reviewed security footage from that night. You were doing your job exactly as protocol dictated. He stood again, seemingly unable to remain still. I owe you an apology, Ms. Walsh. My words were unwarranted and cruel. I allowed politics to override fairness. Eleanor sat perfectly still, uncertain she was hearing correctly. Victor Kensington, apologizing. Furthermore, he continued, your actions during the fire demonstrated exceptional courage. The kind of character that, he paused, searching for words, that I find myself admiring greatly. The silence that followed felt charged with unspoken meaning. Eleanor finally found her voice. Thank you, Mr. Kensington. I appreciate that. Victor returned to his desk, retrieving a folder. I'd like to offer you a new position. Director of Special Projects, reporting directly to me. Eleanor blinked in surprise. That's a significant promotion. It's commensurate with your abilities, which I've clearly underestimated. He slid the folder across to her. The role would involve overseeing our charitable initiatives and developing new community engagement programs. Your salary would double, naturally. Why? The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop it. Why me? Victor's expression softened further. Because I've realized something important about Ravenwood and about myself. We've been focused on luxury and exclusivity at the expense of authentic connection with the communities we serve. You understand people in a way I never have. He paused. In a way I'd like to learn. Over the weeks that followed, Eleanor settled into her new role, discovering unexpected fulfillment in work that aligned with her values. The promotion brought challenges, including occasional resistance from executives who viewed her rapid advancement with suspicion. But it also offered something she'd never experienced at Ravenwood: visibility. Working directly with Victor revealed layers to his character she'd never glimpsed before. Behind closed doors, his legendary perfectionism remained, but so did a dry wit and surprising depth of knowledge about art and literature. Most revealing were his interactions with hotel staff when he thought no one was watching. Small moments of genuine concern Eleanor might have missed in her previous role. You've changed him, Charlotte remarked over lunch one day. Having become a friend and ally. He actually smiled during the board meeting yesterday. Nearly gave old Ferguson a heart attack. Eleanor shook her head. I doubt I have that kind of influence. You underestimate yourself, Charlotte said knowingly. Benedict asks about you constantly, by the way. He's convinced his fire angel walks on water. Eleanor laughed, though the nickname made her uncomfortable. I'm no angel. I just did what needed doing. Which is exactly what makes you special, Charlotte replied. Most people do what's expected. You do what's right. One evening, as Eleanor worked late finalizing plans for a literacy fundraiser, Victor appeared in her office doorway. It's past 9, he observed. The work will still be here tomorrow. Eleanor stretched, realizing how stiff she'd become. Says the man famous for sleeping in his office. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. Perhaps we're both workaholics in need of intervention. He hesitated. Have you eaten? I was about to order something. That night marked a subtle shift in their professional relationship. Dinner in Victor's office became an occasional occurrence when they both worked late. Casual conversations over takeout that gradually ventured beyond hotel business into personal territories. Eleanor learned about Victor's complicated relationship with his demanding father whose approval he'd sought even after taking over the company. Victor discovered Eleanor's passion for art history and her dreams of traveling to the great museums of Europe. Dreams deferred to support her sister's education. "Why event planning?" he asked one evening. "With your knowledge of art, you could have pursued museum work." Eleanor considered the question. "Museums preserve beautiful things behind glass. I wanted to create experiences people could step inside and feel part of." Something in her answer seemed to resonate with Victor. The next day, he approved her proposal for a community arts program in the hotel's newly renovated wing. Space that could have generated significant revenue as premium suites. Not everyone supported Victor's evolving approach to business. At a contentious board meeting, Eleanor witnessed firsthand the pressure he faced from shareholders concerned about short-term profits. "This isn't a charity, Victor," snapped James Ferguson, the most vocal critic. "Your father built this company on exclusivity and luxury, not community outreach and art programs for underprivileged children." Victor remained calm. "My father built this company to last generations. Adapting to changing values isn't weakness, it's smart business." Later, Eleanor found Victor alone on the rooftop garden, staring out at the city. "They'll come around," she said softly, joining him at the railing. Perhaps he didn't look at her. Or perhaps they're right. Perhaps I'm allowing personal feelings to cloud business judgment. The implication hung in the air between them. Personal feelings. For the first time, Victor had acknowledged the undercurrent that had been building between them for weeks. "Is that what this is?" Eleanor asked carefully. "A business judgment clouded by personal feelings?" Victor turned to her then, vulnerability evident in his expression. "I don't know anymore. I've spent my entire life building walls to protect myself from exactly this kind of uncertainty." He took a deep breath. "What I do know is that meeting you, truly seeing you, has changed something fundamental in how I view the world." Eleanor felt her heart race. "And how do you view it now?" "As a place where courage matters more than power, where the strongest people aren't those who command the loudest, but those who act with compassion even when no one is watching." His voice dropped lower. "Where someone I once ordered to stay silent might become the only voice I truly want to hear." Before Eleanor could respond, Victor's phone rang, an emergency requiring his immediate attention. The moment passed, but something had irrevocably shifted between them, a bridge forming over the troubled waters of their initial meeting. As autumn progressed into winter, Ravenwood Hotel began preparations for the upcoming Diamond Gala. 1 year since the fire that had changed everything. Eleanor found herself at the center of planning, not from the shadows this time, but leading with a confidence she'd never before possessed. And as the date approached, both Eleanor and Victor found themselves wondering how their story would continue when they returned to the place where it had truly begun. H2. Symphony of Second Chances. The night of the Diamond Gala arrived with an electric anticipation that seemed to vibrate through Ravenwood's grand ballroom. 1 year since the disastrous fire, the hotel had risen from the ashes, transformed not just physically, but in spirit. Everyone felt it, from the staff who now walked with newfound pride to the guests who remarked on the warmth that had replaced the previous atmosphere of cool exclusivity. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her office, hardly recognizing herself in the midnight blue gown, a far cry from last year's staff uniform. As director of special projects, she would be attending as a guest this time, representing the community programs that had become Ravenwood's unexpected new focus. A knock at her door revealed Charlotte, resplendent in emerald silk. "Look at you," she breathed. "Victor won't know what hit him." Eleanor blushed. "This isn't about Victor." isn't it? Charlotte smiled knowingly. You two have been dancing around each other for months. The entire staff has a betting pool on when you'll finally admit what's happening. Nothing is happening, Eleanor protested, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. True, her relationship with Victor had evolved into something neither professional nor personal, but hovering in an undefined space between. Late-night strategy sessions that drifted into philosophical discussions. Shared coffee breaks on the rooftop garden. Texts about art exhibitions and books that had nothing to do with hotel business. But neither had crossed the invisible line separating them. A line drawn by professional ethics, their different positions within the company, and perhaps most significantly, by the lingering ghosts of their first encounter. He's different with you, Charlotte said more seriously. Happier. More human. Eleanor adjusted her bracelet nervously. We should go. The guests will be arriving. The ballroom had been redesigned after the fire, incorporating elements that Eleanor had suggested. Local artists' work displayed alongside priceless pieces, a more open layout that encouraged mingling across social boundaries. Subtle touches that made the opulence feel welcoming rather than intimidating. Victor found her by the newly installed fountain, its soft burbling creating a peaceful oasis amid the growing crowd. He approached slowly, as if giving her time to retreat if she wished. Eleanor. He had begun using her first name months ago, each syllable spoken with a warmth that still startled her. You look beautiful. She smiled, taking in his impeccable tuxedo and the subtle changes in his bearing since last year. Shoulders less rigid, expression more open. So do you. I mean, handsome, not beautiful. Though I suppose men can be beautiful, too. She stopped, embarrassed by her uncharacteristic nervousness. Victor's smile deepened at her flustered response. I have something to show you before the guests arrive. Will you come with me? He led her through the ballroom to the small antechamber, where, a year ago, she had found Benedict during the fire. The space had been completely redesigned, transformed into a bright reading room lined with bookshelves. Our newest community space, Victor explained. Local children will come here 3 times weekly for reading programs. The first sessions begin next month. Eleanor turned slowly, taking in the colorful cushions, child-sized furniture, and carefully selected books. It's perfect. There's more. Victor gestured to a plaque beside the entrance, simply inscribed, The Eleanor Walsh Reading Room, where courage creates change. Eleanor's breath caught. Victor, I can't accept. Please. He interrupted gently. Let me honor what you did here, what you continue to do every day. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Eleanor saw past all his careful defenses to the man beneath, vulnerable, hopeful, and looking at her as if she were the answer to questions he'd been asking his entire life. The moment was interrupted by Janet, announcing the first guests had arrived. Victor offered his arm. Shall we? Throughout the evening, Eleanor observed the subtle ways Victor had changed as a leader. He introduced her to investors, not as a subordinate, but as a partner in the hotel's vision. He acknowledged staff by name, remembered personal details about their lives, and listened, truly listened, when others spoke. During dinner, Eleanor found herself seated beside Diane Lancaster, whose demeanor had noticeably cooled since the previous year. Ms. Walsh, Diane said stiffly, I believe I owe you an apology for last year's incident. The painting, I mean. Surprised, Eleanor nodded graciously. That's very kind of you to say, Mrs. Lancaster. It wasn't kindness that prompted it, Diane said with unexpected honesty. It was Victor, actually. He made it quite clear that respecting you was a condition of maintaining board connections. She studied Eleanor curiously. You've certainly made an impression on him. As the auction began, more successful than ever, with unprecedented community participation, Eleanor slipped away briefly to the balcony, needing a moment of quiet. The city stretched before her, a tapestry of lights mirroring the stars above. Escaping your triumph? Victor's voice came from behind her. Eleanor turned with a smile. Just catching my breath. It's been an incredible year. Victor joined her at the railing. A year ago tonight, you taught me the most important lesson of my life, which was that true strength isn't found in power or control. His voice grew softer. It's found in the courage to put others before yourself, to risk everything for what matters. He took a deep breath. Eleanor, I need to ask you something important. Eleanor's heart quickened. Yes? I'm stepping down as CEO. Whatever she had expected, it wasn't this. What? Why? To launch the Ravenwood Foundation, focusing full-time on the community initiatives you've helped build. Charlotte will take over hotel operations. He paused. The board approved it this morning. Eleanor struggled to process this revelation. But the hotel is your life, your father's legacy. And it will continue to thrive under Charlotte's leadership. Victor took her hands in his. The foundation is the future I want to build, but I don't want to build it alone. His gray eyes searched hers. Last year, I silenced the most important voice I would ever hear. I've regretted those words every day since. He reached into his pocket, removing a small velvet box. Inside lay not a ring, as Eleanor had momentarily feared, but a delicate gold key. This opens a private exhibition at the National Gallery, Victor explained. Art from around the world that I thought you might like to see before deciding on our European tour destinations. Eleanor blinked in confusion. European tour? Then, the Foundation's first international initiative, bringing art education to underserved communities, starting in Paris, Florence, and Barcelona. His expression grew serious. I'd like you to lead it, Eleanor, not as my employee, but as my partner, in every sense. Understanding dawned as Victor continued. I've spent my life hiding behind wealth and power, afraid to be vulnerable. Then you walk through fire to save someone you barely knew, showing me what real courage looks like. He squeezed her hands gently. I don't want you to stay silent anymore. I want to hear your voice every day, challenging me, inspiring me, guiding me. Eleanor looked at this man who had journeyed from tyrant to ally to something far more precious. What if I say no? Then you say no, Victor answered simply. The position is yours regardless, and my feelings won't change. I've learned that true strength includes respecting others' choices. Eleanor smiled slowly, recognizing the gift in his words, not just love, but freedom. The freedom to choose without pressure or obligation. A year ago, I was invisible, she said softly. Now I'm planning international art tours and running reading rooms. You were never invisible, Victor corrected. I just wasn't looking properly. Inside, the orchestra began playing the final piece of the evening. Through the open doors, Eleanor could see staff and guests mingling without the rigid barriers of the previous year. Sophia Reeves chatted animatedly with a young art student from Eleanor's community program. Benedict, allowed to stay up for the entire event this time, demonstrated a magic trick for delighted donors. We should go back in, Eleanor said. They'll be looking for you to close the event. Victor shook his head. Actually, I've asked someone else to speak tonight. Minutes later, Eleanor found herself approaching the podium, heart racing, as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. The microphone stood before her, waiting for her voice. The voice that Victor had once ordered silent, now given center stage. A year ago, she began, her clear voice carrying throughout the ballroom. I stood in this room as someone whose job was to blend into the background. Today I stand before you because one night changed everything. Not just for me, but for Ravenwood. as she spoke about the transformation of the hotel, the new community initiatives, and the foundation's vision for the future. Eleanor caught Victor's gaze from the front row. His eyes held a promise that whatever paths they chose, whether together or apart, the silence between them had been broken forever, replaced by a symphony of second chances that would continue to echo long after this night ended. When she concluded, to enthusiastic applause, Victor approached the stage, taking her hand as they stood together before the crowd. Equals at last. Their journey from adversaries to allies to something deeper, becoming part of Ravenwood's evolving legacy. Later that night, as the last guests departed and staff began the meticulous cleanup, Eleanor and Victor returned to the rooftop garden. Above them, stars punctuated the velvet sky. Below, the city hummed with life and possibility. "So," Victor asked quietly, "what's your answer?" Eleanor turned to him, the woman who had once been invisible, now fully seen and celebrated for exactly who she was. "Yes," she said simply. "To the partnership, to Europe, to all of it, but on one condition." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Name it." "That you never again tell anyone to stay silent when they're speaking truth." He smiled, drawing her close. "I believe I can manage that condition quite happily." As their lips finally met under the starlit sky, Eleanor reflected on how a single moment of courage had rippled outward, transforming not just two lives, but an entire community. The whisper of her actions had become an echo that would continue to resonate long after this night. Proof that sometimes the quietest voices could create the most profound change.